Morning, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another Constitutional Talk. We talked, a year and a half ago now about Lexington and Concord. And this last summer, we talked about what happened on the Green. But what I want to bring up today and talk about today is the period of time prior to Lexington, when they were planning for the trip. Now, this was a secret mission to go out to Lexington. The British had gathered with their leaders that evening, of April 18th, about 8 o'clock. 2 o'clock, they had stopped all leaves, anybody coming in. They were holding them. They were going to meet in big numbers down at the Boston Commons. There was a beach there where they could head out over. And so they met in their government building upstairs, a guard outside. They went through their maps. They discussed the plans. There were really only 3 possibilities of leaving Boston, and the one was through the bottleneck down south, the only land connection to what was really, other than the land connection, would have been an island. But it was a good-sized peninsula that the city of Boston was so they could leave that way. And by the time they would get over to Cambridge on the other side, it was about 5 miles. Or they could go straight across the Commons, which is the trip they decided to go on, and a beach over at Phipps Farm across the way. The third exit was taking a ferry across the north end and arrive over in Charlestown. This is the path that Paul Revere took. But they chose to meet, and their time was 10 o'clock departure time. Although it didn't really work well for them. They had kept this exhibition secret. At least they thought they had. But see, the problem with Boston was you had 15,000 people that really weren't doing much of anything for work because the Townsend Acts had blockaded in Boston, and there really wasn't anything for them to do. They were trying to starve them out. You had 2,000 troops inside of Boston scattered all over in people's homes and stables, barns, anything they could get. Tents up on the Commons, and so it was really an intimate setting between the colonists and the redcoats. And the redcoats knew what the colonists were doing for the most part, and the colonists knew what the redcoats were doing because they had nothing else to do but to watch the redcoats. But that night, they went down to the Commons, to the beachhead there, and began to prepare to head across the way. Dowes had been informed that he had to make his ride, and he proceeded, as the troops were lining up down in the Commons, he slowly worked his way across. He went down, loitering, and eventually sneaking out, leading his horse out of town. And he went south and then around the river, crossing and heading up to Monotony in that area. And then they sent Paul Revere out north across to Charlestown. Now, the purpose of these lights, the lanterns in the North Church, were there to give a last-ditch warning and to signal people in Charlestown. And so when they climbed up the church tower and they put those 2 lanterns up briefly, telling them that it would be by sea, not by land, The land was the land bridge the Dows crossed, and the sea was the way they were going. So they signaled over in Charlestown, and the Reverend over there got his horse ready for Paul Revere. There were roaming patrols of British officers all over in the outskirts, and they were looking for anything that it could be a problem. When Paul Revere appeared, one of the soldiers that was on patrol saw him and started chasing him, and Paul Revere fled north at that point, altering his route and eventually coming back in Menominee that way. The troops were late getting across the water. They lined up. They argued over who was going over first. Once they got over the water and they stopped at Phipps Farm, the tide was rolling in. And as more and more troops made the crossing and lined up, they were standing in water. It got to be almost 1:30 before they actually got headed out. And once they did, they had started encountering people on the road they thought were spies. Turned out they were just milk deliverymen. But everywhere, because Revere and Dow's had made it early, everywhere they stopped, they gathered more people, more horses, and more riders headed out. It was a great way of telling them what was about to occur. So they marched off through the bog and crossed a narrow, windy paths through Phipps Farm there, which really became almost an island when the tide was in. And this was the situation that the soldiers had. There were gunshots all over. There were bells ringing. This was supposed to be a secret expedition, but obviously the Patriots had found that they were coming. There was no way of hiding hundreds and hundreds of soldiers marching up towards Lexington and Concord. And that's really what happened with this secret plan. It just leaked out. Everybody knew what was going on because it was too big a movement. Just the leaving their homes and the homes of others where they were staying and heading down to the Commons kind of drained Boston of probably half the troops. And that in itself sent an indication that something was up. So they weren't able to keep it secret. And so when they marched into Lexington and those first shots were fired, they realized at that point that there was no way of hiding what had happened. When Dow's crossed the Charles River, warning people, the locals came out and they removed the planks from the bridge to make it more difficult for reinforcements to cross. And by the time the British reached Lexington and those first shots were fired, they sent a rider back for reinforcements, so this was an issue. And they only had 16 rounds of ammunition apiece with them. So, and no cannon, because they felt the cannon would hold up their troop movements. And this is just how it was laid in the middle of the night. You're talking 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're marching up through, heading towards Concord. So there really was no way. And gunshots were going off, signaling Patriot organizations. The riders were hitting up other towns. And so you were having the movement of militias coming in down from the road as they left town. They were scared, really, when they got reports from people they met on the road of what was going on. And the troops kind of got caught in their own trap, of their own device, of their own secret mission. They had sent reconnaissance out weeks in advance they had guides with their troops leading the way. So it's not like they weren't familiar with the situation. 6 months earlier, Dow's had snuck out of town. He was real good at sneaking past the guardhouse down at the Bottleneck, and he had captured cannon. And when he got back into town, 15,000 militiamen wound up coming into the city. So they knew of the risks and dangers, which is why they tried to keep this mission so secret. They thought they could sneak out of town, get over to Concord, get it done, and be returned by 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning without anybody being the wiser. A failed mission, the beginning of our conflict. Think about all that we had to go through to get liberty. Liberty is important, but fighting and willing to die for your cause is what it took. Thanks for your time today. We'll catch you next time on the next Constitutional Talk. Goodbye for now, folks. Have a good week.